Minutes to talk about what I term ecocentric democracy, to define that and explore how it can work in practice. So the background then. Firstly, the roots of my interest in ecocentric democracy. So I'm not a political theorist or a scientist. Rather, I'm motivated by my practical desires as an earth-centered conservationist. And my interest grew out of a paper I did on reintroduction of the Eurasian links to the UK, which has just been published, and I did that with colleagues at Bangor University in North Wales. So, what is eco-democracy? If we go back nearly 25 years, it first appears in the literature defined by Jan Lundberg as restructuring of our society for maximum conservation and equal rights for all species. This, you may see, has parallels with Vandana Shiva's more recent concept of Earth democracy, and I'll just pull out one element of that. Point 9 of her People's Pact to Protect the Planet. We are members of the Earth community in which all species, peoples and cultures have intrinsic worth and rights to sustenance, which in turn echoes Patrick Curry's ecological republicanism. Now, in Curry's ecological republicanism, he defines a community as that which meets the conceptual demands of both human community, as understood by the social sciences, and natural community as defined by ecologists. Now, I think this is an idea which hasn't been given its due yet, and I urge you to seek the paper in which he defines this, because I think it's a really potentially powerful idea that needs to be unpacked more. But both of those are grand concepts, and they're lacking in practical detail of how we can actually achieve these large visions. So what I thought was lacking was a pragmatic definition. And so with Patrick Curry, I produced this, and this was published this year in a British conservation journal called Ecos. And we were delighted, despite this being a mainstream conservation journal, and you won't be able to see it probably right at the bottom, Nature's Own Rights, appearing on the cover of a mainstream conservation journal, which we're very happy with. I'll just pull out one piece of that paper. This is our definition of ecocentric democracy, and it spans across 2 slides. So it's groups and communities using decision-making systems that respect the principles of human democracy while explicitly extending valuation to include the intrinsic value of non-human nature. And I don't use the term intrinsic value of nature. Humans are part of nature, and so I think non-human nature, although a little clumsy, is a useful distinction to make. So that's halfway through the definition. So we're doing this with the ultimate goal of evaluating human wants equally to those of other species and the living systems that make up the ecosphere. So to refer back to the citations presentation, other species is a shorthand for species and individuals within species. But crucially, this extends to living systems as well. So things like soil and water in rivers, abiotic components also deserve to be valued. So the scope and scale of ecocentric democracy or eco-democracy, so it applies to decisions directly affecting conservation and also broader decisions affecting the habitats and the environment in general. It can operate at any scale geographically, from a local stakeholder group to an international alliance of governments, sort of like this one here. So the rest of the presentation is going to outline 4 ways, very briefly, which we can then explore more if you come to the workshop with me, on how this can work in practice. So option 1 is deliberative eco-democracy, and this involves allocating protected time in decision-making processes for public discussion of the intrinsic value of non-human nature, and it could be achieved, for instance, through a council of all beings. The second option is eco-democracy by human proxies with voting rights, and this echoes the presentation on cetaceans you will notice. This requires assigning stakeholder status and voting rights to non-humans, which could be achieved through human proxies. This point here says about how this should extend beyond species to non-living components, such as water and soil. I don't believe we need to limit things to sentience, although that obviously has a powerful moral argument, but I think we need to be looking beyond that as well. And the human proxies will need a good grasp of both ecological and ethical principles. So the third option is eco-democracy by juries of citizens. Here, one set of options is drawn up by a group of experts in ecology, environmental science and ethics, and they need to be earth-centred. Then a traditional set of recommendations is drawn up by normally elected politicians, and where there is dispute, a jury of citizens is tasked with deciding whether, within an ecocentric worldview, the human desires are sufficiently important to outweigh the needs of the community of life as a whole. So this is an idea I don't think we've covered today, but another idea we have is option 4 here, my final option, eco-democracy by statute. So here is where we write the need to act in accordance with the intrinsic rights of non-human nature into statute. Precedents exist in countries such as Ecuador, although that's been debated, Bolivia and New Zealand, the river you saw, and the pressure for such statutes in other nations could be generated through recognising a law of ecocide. But I'm not an expert on either of these things, so you'll hear much better things from others here today on those subjects. And a little advert for a journal we have launched. Thank you.